Welcome to another episode of Quick Concepts, where I try to explain a core gameplay concept for a game in a relatively short amount of time. So, Endless Space 2 can be very overwhelming, and one thing about that is the resources here. The FIDSI system means there are 5 different basic resources, and then there's also a bunch of other resources, like strategics, luxury resources you can find here, and that's really initially difficult to deal with. And you might be thinking, well, if there's so many resources, which ones should I prioritize? And the short answer is there are better resources, but that's also very weird because resources change based on how the game is going. For instance, if you have nothing to build, if you have nothing to spend industry on, it's very bad. If you have lots of dust, but you can't find anything on the market, dust is bad. If you have a lot of science, but science victory is disabled, or you can get the sciences, but then not make use of them because you're lacking industry, the science is not that valuable. If you have lots of influence, but nothing to spend it on, influence is not very valuable. If you have lots of food, but all your populations are full, food is not very valuable. So there's going to be situations where each resource is bad, and there's going to be certain situations where certain resources are better than others. Maybe you need a lot of industry because you're building lots of fleets, and then industry becomes your best resource. So resource values tend to fluctuate a bit, but some resources consistently are better than others. And the reason for this is that there's a core concept or gameplay feature which has to do with the ability of a resource to be transformed into other resources. So let's call that concept resource transformation. So the reason why I think industry tends to be one of the best resources in Endless Space 2, and other resources can obviously be good in different situations for similar reasons, is that it's the easiest to transform into other resources, or use to get other resources. So what does that mean? If you pick up Xeno, you're investing in industry, right? But that also means you'll be able to turn that, or use that industry to invest in other resources in the future. So if we pick up the Xeno on our homeworld, we can later get the cerebral reality upgrade with industry faster. That means we're getting industry, but we're also going to get other resources by getting industry. So industry is like a slow way of getting other resources. So in a way, industry transforms, or industry is used to obtain other resources. And that's a way that resources can be really good. Because the value of resources fluctuates during a game, each resource that can get you other resources is going to be extra valuable because it's going to have added flexibility. Science is good for similar reasons. So if you get science, that means you can get resources. We can get upgrades, like public-private partnerships, which give you other resources. So in this case, this gets you more science, but so it's similarly good for Xeno because it gets you more science, which you can then turn into other resources. So you can get something like planetary landscaping if you're low on food. You can get Xeno if you're low in industry. You can get new planets with that. And those give you other resources and maybe let you get you more out of your food because you get more food, worker production or worker space to produce. We can get dust upgrades. So food is good. So science gets you direct things, like it gets you new planets. But it also gets the ability to build things which will help you get other resources. Similar for influence. When you have influence, you can spend it on laws, which will then help you out in some ways with other resources. Maybe you can pick up extra dust or extra science if you need it. And you can try and impress minor factions, or we haven't met any yet. But we can try and impress minor factions with influence, and that turns influence into new colonies eventually, which get you other resources. So you're constantly trying to build up each resource, but resources that make it easier for you to build up those other resources, or pick up those other resources, have extra value for that reason. Now, sometimes this value is compounded if you can quickly switch between resources. Like for dust production. If you have lots of dust in the endgame, you can very easily buy lots of minor resources like luxuries and strategics. And so you can convert dust into any luxury or strategic resource which you're missing. You can also convert dust into industry by buying out. In this case, we're playing United Empire, so we can do the same with influence. So you can use, if you have enough dust, you can convert it into industry. And you can't convert it into science, but so dust can transform into a lot of resources, but not all of them. The ability of a resource to produce other resources, and in general, just the flexibility of a resource contributes to a resource's overall value as well. Like, food tends to be less valuable because it's generally harder to get all the resources you need out of planets. And as you can see, we're getting a little bit of resources per food population, but not that much, and we have less flexibility than with picking up lots of extra sciences and extra production. So for that reason, and also because the food upgrades tend to be a bit worse in this game, food tends to be not as powerful as science and industry because it's harder for food to end up producing you other resources you need. So it's less productive of other resources. Obviously, resources that produce more of themselves and are also good at producing other resources are doubly valuable. So science can get you researchers which improve more science, like public-private partnerships in xenobiology. And industry can produce more industry, which gets you then even more food, dust, science, and other things or influence in the future. So that's why you should generally, with most factions, you value industry quite highly. Not because industry is necessarily, well, it is partly intrinsically more powerful, but because industry is powerful at getting you everything else. And similarly, in the end game, dust is very good because dust can turn into any other resource or turn into most other resources. And that's why science is always good, because science enables you to use your industry and your dust to pick other stuff up. And also sometimes science directly gives you other resources via like unlocking the strategics or something. So that's a quick rundown of why certain resources are better than others in general. Obviously, you're going to need every single resource to win a game of Endless Space 2, or to do well, or your average game, I should say. But certain resources like science and industry you're going to prioritize a bit more because they have an easier time of generating other resources as the game goes on. And certain resources, it's harder to convert them into other resources, or harder to generate other resources from them. Like food. Food is okay, but it's often harder to get other resources in large quantities out of food than it is out of industry, for instance. And dust is very flexible. It can turn into a lot of different kinds of resources, especially strategics and luxury resources. But dust is quite expensive, or you're getting less value per use of dust, which is made up by its extreme flexibility later in the game, when you can generate a lot of dust. Or later in the game, like not in the opening. So I think for this reason, these three resources tend to be the most important. And we can understand that with the concept of resource transformation or resource generation. Not that these other resources aren't important to the game, but whenever you have a resource, you have to think about how can I use this resource on something else when I need that other resource. And obviously, this concept can help you figure out factions which are based on different resources. So with Vodyani, for instance, you have essence production, and their essence acts kind of like food, but it's better. So for each production of essence, you can get new ships and new populations, and using essence, you can pick up more of more of other resources in general by getting the powerful population units. Or if the Riftborn, industry is valuable because industry gets you new population units, which are basically significant upgrades to all your other resources as well. So industry and essence can take the form of food there, but I think they're a bit more powerful, meaning they can get you more of these other resources faster. So those dual concepts of, I'm clearly distinguishing them here, resource generation and resource transformation, I think will make it easier to see which resources you should prioritize. And the short answer is you should prioritize resources that can easily get you everything else you need, because you're going to need all kinds of resources to win a game of Endless Legend or Endless Space 2. And the resources that are going to be best are the ones that are going to make it easier for you to pick up everything else you need. For this reason, industry tends to be the best, because you use industry as a base to pick everything up in conjunction with science. So thanks for tuning in. Let me know if you like this sort of strategic content in a more compact format.